Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at something called the production function, where we look at how do inputs like labor, land, and capital get turned into outputs, and what's the relationship between those things. So let's get started. Okay, so this first section about the production function really just tells you what it is. It's a relationship, just like any other function, right? So like a demand function or a supply function, it's a relationship between inputs and outputs. And it tells you essentially that here's how many inputs are going to yield how many outputs is really what it is. There are really two types of inputs, and we kind of distinguish between something called the short run and the long run, and I'll get into that in a moment. We have variable inputs and we have fixed inputs. The difference between the two is that in a short span of time, businesses often find that they can't change certain kinds of inputs. So imagine you're running a restaurant, right? A restaurant. If you ran a restaurant, then your labor input you could change, right? You could tell the waiters, right? Labor would be the waiters, those are variable. But you might have like the oven and the tables, right? And you'd have the actual building. All of those things would be fixed in the short run, in kind of a short span of time. But in the long run, given enough time, you're running your restaurant, right? So we'll spell that out there, restaurant. In enough time, you could buy another oven, or you could get more tables, or you could maybe expand the building. In the long run, all of your inputs actually become variable. And so when we distinguish between short run and long run, the only distinction is really just in the short run, some of your inputs are what we call fixed, that you can't change some of them. In the long run, all of your inputs are variable, and so it looks a little bit different. Now, for the most part in this class, we're going to be operating in the short run, in the moment or in the time period in which you can't change some of your inputs, but you could change others, like often your labor. You could tell the waiters, hey, we're a little slow today. You could just go home. Now, we're given this table here that lists the number of units of labor that we might have and the amount of product that we could produce. Now, oftentimes product is going to be output. It'll be called output, or it'll be given the abbreviation TP for total product. We're going to use lots of abbreviations in this class, so we're going to get used to kind of working within them. Now, when we have no inputs, we know that we have no outputs, and so that's obviously zero. But when we hire one worker, maybe we get 3 output, 3 product. And so what we would say then is that the additional or the marginal, right? And so in this class, instead of the word additional, which is lots and lots of letters, we use the word margin. Think like on the edge, right? The edge one is going to cause us to have 3 units. And so that's the change in the total product that occurs as a result of adding one input. So if you ever get a question that asks what's the marginal product of a particular input, it's just how much did that particular input add to the total product. So let's go ahead and solve that. We have 7 from 10 to 24, 14 from 24 to 36. We have 12 from 36 to 40 is 4. Oh, that's a steep drop off. 2, 0, and then -2. Now, a quick kind of comment about some of these things, right? This pattern of rising marginal product and then a real steep drop off, and then it actually starts to go negative is something that happens with every single firm. It happens every single time, and that's because you have you're going to have, well, I know that this is true with this data set, you have an increased amount of the variable input, but off to the side, they're working with a fixed amount of some of the other types of inputs. So maybe they have a fixed amount of pizza ovens or tables in the pizzeria or the actual size of the building. And so once you start hiring like the 8th pizza worker, all you're really doing is cramming more. And I like this visual. You're cramming all of these teenagers into the back of the pizzeria, and they're like, I can't even move. And it actually costs us 2 pizzas as a result of hiring that 8th worker. So we would say it's never rational to hire a worker where the marginal product goes negative. Like you wouldn't want to hire that guy. But you also wouldn't want to hire the 7th guy, right? That doesn't make any sense because you didn't add any marginal product. So these 7th and 8th workers, those would be irrational. Now, another measure that we're going to kind of talk about just occasionally is called average product. And that's really just taking how many on average did these units of labor produce given kind of the total amount here. So we have total product, right? Total product divided by the inputs, right? The number of the inputs. And so we would say 3 over 1 is 3. The average number of units they make is 3. 10 over 2 is 5. 24 over 3 is 8. 36 over 4 is 9. 40 over 5 is 8. 42 over 6 is 7. This is like a little math test for us, right? It's elementary math. 42 over 7 is 6. 40 over 8 is 5. And so you can see that actually a similar pattern emerges with average product. It rises and then it starts to come back down again. And you can actually see that like where this one hits its maximum, kind of the very next one is actually where average product is going to hit its maximum. Now, right below this, I've got a graph of what these kind of things would look like in kind of a really simple picture. Now, this is something that's on the AP test, but you're not going to have to draw it. Not have to draw. So you have to be able to understand it, and you'll see questions that kind of assess your understanding of these relationships of these different product functions, but you won't have to redraw this graph. It's a little bit kind of difficult. Now, a couple of stages emerge once we start to notice like where they hit their maximums, where they start to go negative. Now, the total product function shows here a really steep increase, and that in that stage, which we're going to call stage 1, right? And there isn't really any particular reason, it's just stage 1. There's increasing marginal returns. And when we say there's increasing marginal returns, we're saying that the marginal product of actually the first few workers is rising. As we hire additional workers, each additional worker is actually able to generate more output than the previous worker. And so you can see that as this really steep increase in total product. You can also see it here where the marginal product function is positive. You can see this one, which is marginal product, right? That's the marginal product. It's actually a positive slope. Now, at a certain point, that marginal product's going to kind of top out. And we see it happen right here with the third worker. That's where, once we move to the fourth worker, we actually transition into stage 2. Now, in stage 2, you have decreasing marginal product for each additional worker that you hire. So that would be like the fourth worker, the fifth worker, the sixth worker, and then kind of the seventh is actually where it crosses right here. So these workers in here are between 12, 4, and 2. Those are all where they're decreasing because they're less marginal product than the previous worker. Adding an input is going to generate less marginal product than the previous worker. Now, at a certain point, you're going to see decreasing marginal returns or negative marginal returns. Maybe it's better to say negative here than decreasing, although it truly is decreasing because these are still increasing, right? The diminishing marginal returns, it's still increasing, but it really is actually saying that they're not generating as much as they had before. So the marginal product for these units is MP is positive, and for these units, the MP is negative. Now, you would never, as I kind of just said a moment ago, you would never want to hire that 8th teenager who's like packed into the back of the pizzeria. I can't move. It cost us 2 pizzas. And so this is our stage 3. And in that range, you can see you'd have a negative marginal product, but you also see that total product is falling in that stage because you hired an additional worker, total product actually went down. So you don't want to be in that range. Now, there's a couple other relationships to start to notice. Notice that like where average product peaks is actually where marginal product crosses right through it. That's because think about it like your grade point average. If you have a marginal grade where you got a better grade than your GPA, it's going to push that GPA up. It's going to push the average up. And that's actually what's happening in this range where the marginal product is bigger than the average. It's causing the average to rise right here. But as soon as you start getting grades where the additional grade is lower than the average, it's going to start to bend your average back down again. And that's actually why right here where average product is at its peak, that's actually the point where marginal product is going to start to go below it. So you'll sometimes see questions that test your understanding of those internal relationships between them. Now, the last thing in this lecture to kind of understand is this diminishing marginal returns piece. It's so important. And that's because it happens with every single business, no matter what, as long as there are fixed inputs. And the reason why that matters, right? So it kind of happens with every single business, but the reason why that matters is that it's actually going to make each unit of output, once we get into this stage 2, it's going to make each unit that we produce cost just a little bit more to make. Every single business is going to face this problem. And it's called the law of diminishing marginal returns because we keep adding more and more variable inputs. We're going to get less and less marginal product out of each one of those inputs. And so it's going to cause the marginal cost, the additional cost of a unit, to increase. And so you have this kind of mirrored image that we're going to find that as the marginal product is rising, the marginal cost of those units is falling. But as the marginal product is falling, the marginal cost of the units is going to rise. And that is so critical to kind of wrap your head around, right? What we're going to actually see is that as MP increases, marginal cost decreases, and as MP decreases, marginal cost increases. And this notion, where marginal product is kind of decreasing or diminishing means that we will always see the marginal cost of units rising. And that explains why our supply curve is actually upward sloping. Why this cost curve starts rising is 100% because of diminishing marginal returns. So hopefully this helped you understanding the production function. I'll see you next time.